Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, I am Ahmed Mumtaz Mustahsan, your teacher for CSC 141 Introduction to Computer Programming. Students, finally we have reached at the end of our course, and today's lecture is the last lecture. This lecture comprises two parts. In the first part, I'll be discussing some differences between C and C++ language, and in the second part, I'll be talking about C as a object-oriented language. Okay, so we start with the first part of our lecture, that is the difference between programming in C and C++. Let's go through some basic features of C++. C++ is basically improves on many of the C features. So what are those features? We will discuss. So it has a capability of object-oriented category of programming, or we can say that the paradigm of the object-oriented programming. So it obviously increases the quality of the reusability of the software. Whatever the software you develop in object-oriented, you can reuse it, and due to its inherited features and due to the facilities it provides, which are inherited in the C++ language. Once again, the same well-known Bell Labs, and this time Bjorn and Strauss-Strep had developed this concept of this object-oriented, and we have the facility of the classes. So we can say that C++ is a language, C language with classes. What are these classes? I'll explain it to you in the later part of my lecture. So the name is given with C with an increment, just as a concept of increment. So they have used the same concept and used C++ means it's an increment or the enhanced version of C, or it may be called as superset of C. You can use C++ compiler to compile C program. You have seen that. We have used the environment, and that environment was Visual C++. So, and we have used the Visual C++ compiler to compile our programs that we have discussed and demonstrated and learned in this particular course. So it has basically evolved. All the features that are present in the C are almost available in C++. The file type, basically, usually we have a file name, then we have a dot, and then we have a file type. Usually the C has a file type extension with .c, but you have seen that in our case we have not used .c, but rather we have used .cpp, which is the characteristics of the file extension of C++. People may use the lowercase, but some people prefer the uppercase .c. You can have a comments in C by putting / and static, and then you close the comment by using the static and this /. And if you forget to write down the second part of the static and /, then the whole program following that comment becomes the single comment. So in C++ you can use 2 /, and then you are not required to end it also. It's automatically ends with the carry return, or with the new line character. So it's mean that you cannot forget, and in the making the whole program as a comment. Then it has got a feature of input output. As I said, that C language has, we have learned the scanf and printf facilities, but C++ also has the capability to use scanf and printf. Simultaneously, it provides you the capability of use cin and cout that we have very frequently used, and in the last lecture we have demonstrated the IO stream also. That IO stream is basically the part of the C++. So basically, C language does not require to include IO stream, but you have seen that in most of the cases when we use a feature that you must remember the function that was a system within bracket double quote pause, that we have used it to stay within the output of the window. That is the feature of the C++, and that is the function available in C++. Similarly, if we are required to use cin and cout, you are required to include IO stream. Okay, variable in C++ can be defined almost anywhere. The difference between C and C++ is that C requires to define variable in a block, or the variable is available within the block it has been defined. But C++ you can define the variable anywhere in the program, and you can use it after that. So simple adding two function, I expect that you know that, because I guess in my very first program I have used cout, but only the difference is that we were using namespace std semicolon. Instead, if you just don't want to use it, you can just simply use this std, this is a very special operator. I'll give you the name of that particular operator, but the double colon twice, and then you can use cout. If you can just define it in the beginning, then you can, instead of writing the whole this statement, you can just simply write down cout only, and then you already know this insertion operator and extraction operator associated with cin and cout. One operator is related with the cout, which is called an insertion operator, and when we use cin, we use extraction operator, because we need to extract the data from the input stream provided by through the keyboard, and for cout we need to insert the data types or the data into the stream that is supposed to be the output stream. We also have the facility in the C language, we use \n, but whereas in the C++ we can use endline, and that is the same as \n available in the C language. Okay, I'll explain it later on, but you also have learned the cascading that I talked about it, where you can use this extraction and the insertion operator, usually used with the insertion operator, and we can cascade it. Means you can just put these operators just after each and every argument that you are going to put into the insertion stream of the cout. Standard library, basically a C++ program has, just like C has got a standard library. I will quickly pass through in a couple of slides, and I will show you that these are the functions which are available. Just like in the C language, we have got quite a few library functions available. Then we also have the available classes also, and that classes are also defined in the form of the library functions. So two parts to learn in C++. Number one, learn the language itself, and that we have already, I guess we have already learned the art of programming in C. And secondly, to learn the library functions, and these are just like the library function as we have been using it in the C language. You can also define your own function, and the advantage of that is that you can have the exact knowledge that how these functions work, and you can have a most customized functions regarding to your requirements and regarding to your need for your development of the software. Disadvantage could be it's a time consuming and difficult to maintain efficiency and design as well if you are using and designing your own library and defining your own functions. But still we would strongly recommend that you should have your own library functions. Whatever functions you have developed during this particular course, you can just put them in all in one library. At time being, you can just put it into one single folder. I could not teach you how can you design or develop your own library, but maybe in some next course, in the advanced course, you will learn that how can you define your own static library or some dynamic libraries. That was also not the scope of this particular course. Header files, just like the files, header files, we have been using it, and it has got the standard feature of C and C++ that contains .h. And the old style of using the header file is within the double quotes, and you can write down the name and then .h, and then later on we could use it. Then this is the example of that. We could use include and double quotes and then .h, but now it's the new style of using this, that we have been using it with the angle brackets and not using double quotes. And also, if you are putting it in the default directory and you have defined the path of the header file, then you need not to put .h. The system automatically assumes that you are going to include the header files. These are the header files available in different for different purposes, for different uses, and these are the just like available as we have been using it in the stdio stream. You have already been using it. C time, I think we have used it. C string is also available. That I think we have used it in one of our program. C type, we have used it in one of our demonstration session also. So these are the number of functions. I'll just quickly pass and go through it, and you know that how can we use it. IO manipulation that we have done, and we have used it during the IO stream, and the parameterized functions that we have used, parameterized manipulators, and we, for that purpose, we had included in the program IO manipulator. IOMANIP is IO manipulator. File stream, F stream, we have used it for the creation, reading, writing a file, and creating a file. And then there are few more, and just you can go through it. The details are also provided, that what type of function is available, and then with the help of the help facility available in the environment, you can read it out and find out that how can you use it and what are the facilities they provide. String, we have also used it. Then local limits, type info, these are basically the function that depending upon the application and use, you may require it or you may not require it. Okay, inline functions. We have learned something in C language, and that was the preprocessor directives. And in the preprocessor directive, we have learned the one of the preprocessor directive, that was the define, and using the define, we have also learned to define the macros. What does the macro do? Macro basically provide you the find and replace or find and substitute the string. So you can put the code anywhere you like, but you can define it at one single place, and so that at the time of the compilation, the preprocessor already had placed that particular code into the source code that you have defined. Similar to that, but in the C++, this inline function, basically that is a keyword that you use it before the return type. You know that the signature of a function is the return type, then the name of the function, then the argument list. But before the return types, you can put a keyword inline that indicate the system, that indicate the compiler that this is an inline function. The difference between the function and the inline function is that when you use a function, then I have demonstrated you that how the address of the next statement is saved into the stack, into the structure, and then the control is transferred to that particular function. But if you use an inline function, it basically inserts the code so that the control is not transferred, because it takes a long time, it consumes a long time to save the return address and then transfer the control and then comes back again to that function. So basically this inline function provide you the facility that you can just put the code over there and you are not required. Still you can have this independence like a function, but yet this is inserted into the code. So obviously it increases the size, but it increases the productivity. Productivity means you can save much time, and that time that the system consumes in transferring the control and coming back to that particular calling program or calling position. So it speeds up the performance but increase the file size, obviously. So the compiler can ignore the inline qualifier and it just can insert that one line function or a couple of line functions over there, and then you can just use it. So this I have already discussed, this std out. By the way, I have just provided you the reference of this particular lecture, and this is from your reference book, and that the reference has been provided in the first slide, from where it is the official website of your reference book, C How to Program by Detail in Detail. So the keywords, obviously there are few more keywords as compared to the keywords we have discussed in the C language environment, because here we use something with reference to the class, with reference to bool, with reference to case, and obviously it has got the similar keywords also that were the part of the C also, and then we have got the additional keywords like delete, inline, private. These are the characteristics which are already predefined name in the C++ environment. So you can just quickly go through it and you can see that what are these keywords, so that you may not use it accidentally as a variable name in your program that you will develop. References and reference parameters. We already have learned it in C language, but I will just quickly go through it so that you can have a quick revision also. That is, we can call the function by, and we can pass on the parameters as the called arguments. So we can pass these arguments with a couple of ways. One is called by value, where the copy of the each and every argument is provided to the calling function, and the calling function creates its own copy and work on it, and the original data that is provided to that remains intact with the function from where you have called that particular function. So the calling function still have the original copy available and the data remains there. But if you just want to use the same copy, so that instead of providing the duplicate copy, you want to pass on the actual function, you can pass it on the actual function by passing using the terminology called call by reference. In the call by reference case, we need to provide the address of that particular argument, and once the address of that argument is passed on from the calling function to the called function, then the called function has the address of that particular variable, and obviously that is the address of that variable in the memory. So whatever the changes required to be made, that is done, and then all the changes are automatically visible to the calling function also. So it has got its own own use, it has got its own advantages and obviously some own disadvantages also. We have already used it and we know it, so I've just quickly passed it on, and this is the example where we have used this call by reference. This is the address of the variable. We know that the ampersand sign is a very powerful feature available, and putting it before any particular variable means that we can pass on the reference of that particular variable to the calling program, to the call function, and once this reference means the address is available, then it means that particular variable is available. So when we update it, variable plus is equal to 3, so it will add 3 into the original variable in the input, so that in the calling function the value of the variable will also be updated. So this is the same, that you can just use the ampersand sign to load the address of x into y, so the y will also change, and when you make any change into the y means that the change is also made into the variable x also. Dangling reference, that is a terminology that is used in normally in the programming, and that means that you have a reference that is reference of a variable that doesn't exist. So what does it mean? That if you are using a reference to a variable, and if you are returning this from the as a return type from any particular function, so you know that there are some automatic variables. I have defined that automatic variable have got a life, and that life is within the life of that particular function. Once you exit or return from that functions, all the variables that you have defined within that particular functions are automatically lost. So if you are using an address of any particular variable and you're returning that address to the calling function, so that variable will be lost. So the variable will be containing an address, but that variable will not be available. So if you are using that, and if you are using and passing it out to the calling function, then it is suggested, or it is recommended, that you use the word static. If you use the word static, it means that the life of that particular variable will be extended up to the life of that particular program, the execution of that particular program. So in that case, you will not be having any dangling reference, means reference to nothing. Okay, multiple references is just like with a single statement. You can use multiple ampersand sign with its variable, means that these are all the integer addresses. So the like pointers, each reference needs an ampersand s, so that you can use it as the references while you are passing the argument to one particular function. Empty parameter list, I think we have already discussed in our C language course, where we have talked about the default parameter list, empty parameter list, but you have to be a little bit careful, because there is a very minute difference, and that difference means that I was just going to explain you that the parameters, if you omit the parameter, and then there are certain default parameters, and that can be constants, or that can be global variables, or that could be the parameters within the function call. So also, if you are not supplying the enough number of arguments, suppose a function required 3 arguments and you are passing only 1 argument, then the rightmost, means last 2 arguments, will be considered as the default arguments, and this is the way you can define the default argument. Integer x is equal to 1, y is equal to 2, integer z is equal to 3. So if you are only passing x, then y and z are the default arguments that will be picked up by the system automatically. And if you want that the first argument you don't want to use, and you want to use the second argument as a default argument, so what you can do, simply you can use this comma. This comma means that the first argument you are going to use is the default one, and the second one, first argument, you can use it as a default, or maybe as the past argument, and the second argument that you will provide will be could be the default, or could be the argument that you want to pass it on. So by just simply using this comma, that first comma terminates the first, the second comma terminates the second, and then obviously it has got the third argument. So with the help of this comma, you can just use that. Suppose you want to pass on the third one, and you would like that the system should use the first and second as a default. So what you can do, you can put comma, comma, and then you can pass on the third argument. Okay. Empty parameter list, the slight difference that I just promised to explain it to you is that in C, empty parameter list means function takes any argument if you have defined some default argument. But in C++, it means that the function takes no argument. So to declare that the function key is no parameter, if the function does not have any parameter, then what we can do, we can use within the parenthesis in the prototype declaration if function is not using any argument. So we can have a very good practice to use it as a void. Void means that we confirm to the system that this particular function is not going to use any default argument, means function does not require any input argument and function does not return anything. Unary scope resolution operator. So this was the operator that I promised that I will explain it to you. This is called unary scope resolution operator. Double colon. Double colon is a unary scope resolution operator that is very commonly used in C++ environment, and we can use it in different locations and different places, but you should know the name of that particular operator, and that you should remember. So if you want to access a global variables, if a local variable has the same name, we have seen that we can define the global variables. Suppose we can define a counter outside the main program, it is automatically considered as a global variable counter. So we can define a counter also in one particular function. If you define a counter in one particular function, then the counter variable that you have defined within that particular function is available to that function, and you cannot automatically use the counter that is defined as a global variable. So what if you like that the global counter should also be intact and that should also be available to you within a particular function? So for that purpose you can use this unary scope resolution operator, and you can simply use it instead of the variable. You can use it with this one, and then you can use the variable name. Similarly, this typecasting, I think I have taught you in the last lecture how can we do the typecasting, and also we have done the typecasting of with the examples of the float and double also. So that is the feature that is available in C++, and you can use a static cost new type and the variable. So what it does basically, it typecast the variable, and you can the variable can have the new type that you have casted here. For example, I think I've given you the example of the double in the program. So suppose if you use a new cast is float, and this variable was integer, so it will convert integer to the float, or vice versa, from float to the integers also. Stream manipulators, I have dedicated 1.5 lecture on stream manipulator, so kindly allow me to this chapter number 21, I've discussed it in detail with you already, so kindly allow me to skip this part of the discussion here. Function overloading is something very interesting feature available in C++. What we can do basically, we can have the same name of the function but different type of argument. For example, we can define a function square, integer x. Then we can use the same thing by say float square, float x. So we are using the same name but different types of arguments. So you can have your argument either integer, or you can have an argument either float, and also the return type. So this is the technique which is called that function overloading, and this function overloading feature is available in C++. So the program choose the function by its signature. What does it mean? That if you pass argument which is integer, then the function will return integer. Function consider that you are using the definition or the prototype of that particular function which is related with the integer. But if you pass on the float, then it will return the float, and once again it will pick up that since you have passed on a float data to the function, it's mean that you are interested with the float type definition of that particular function. So the signature determined by the function name and parameter types. So type safe linkage ensures proper overloaded function call. So that is also one of the feature available in C language, and that is called the type safe. So next is the function template, and function templates is basically very similar to that, have some similarities to that the previous topic, which is the function overloading, but this is a independent topic where we can define using the word template. So it's a compact way to make overloaded functions. One way of doing it that I have already explained that, but the proper way that is used in the C++ is using the keyword template. So you can use a keyword class or template. So you can use the keyword template or you can use the keyword class. So the syntax of that is the template, and within that you can use class T. T is the data type, or you can use it that it is a template basically. So instead of int or float, you can use template class T, and then it is basically T square T value. So this is a class T. Whatever the value that you are going to provide, suppose if you are providing it as an integer, so it will become template class integer. So the function will be integer square integer value. Okay, so if you pass it on, so in that case you just need to provide one single definition, and that is the template only. So whenever you call the functions, for example integer y is equal to square x, so then x is automatically treated as the integer, but you can just use it with a float, you can use it with a double, because you have defined it as a function template. So this is the way C++ provide you the function overloading. Okay, I would now like to introduce some concepts related to the object and classes. So although there are few more differences, but I have already discussed the major part of the difference between C and C++, the concepts which are interrelated and are very commonly used by in C++ as in C. So as a student of the C language, you should know that what is this slight difference and what are the different facilities available in C and C++. So now we think I think that we can discuss basic object-oriented concept, and for that purpose we need to understand what is an object and object behavior itself. Up to now we have been discussing the in this course the C language, where you can have a data which has a completely passive, means that the whatever the data value you provide, you cannot add or attach the attributes with the data. So it's been that the data is just ordinary piece of information that it can be used wherever you want to use it, and that has not specific attributes. But the function which could manipulate any data are also using the data as if that is a passive entity. But when we talk about an object, so that object contains both data and methods. Means now you can attach the manipulation of the data also as a attribute and a characteristics of that particular data. It's mean that now the data is basically not a passive, but it is considered as an object having certain attributes. And how we add these attributes are added with the help of the methods, and these methods are basically the functions that manipulate the data. So you can also call it as that the functions are called the methods. So an object is active now, it's not passive, and it can perform certain things. What are that are very interesting that we will discuss in the next few minutes. So an object is responsible for its own data, and this data has certain attributes, but it can expose that the data to other object. What does it mean? It's mean that now the object, whatever object you have defined, for example, the object is a table, and then this table could have a color, then this table could have certain measurements that are the attributes associated with this object, and this object is a data. And then you can also expose this data to other objects. For example, you might like to define an object which is a furniture, or which is in office furniture. So the office furniture might have an object which is a table, and another object which is the chair also. So means the object table can be exposed to some other object. Okay, so you will understand that with the help of some more example and explanation that I will provide you now. So I've said that an object contains both data and methods that manipulate the data. Data represents a state of the object. Means state of the object, what example I could quote? Best example that would come into mind is the balance and the check account. So the balance could be a state of the data. We have seen that in the file processing that this balance could be negative. That is one state, that if the balance is negative, it is a credit from the bank. The balance could be 0, it means the state is neither credit nor debit, or the balance could be plus. If the balance is plus, then it is assumed that the state of the balance is a debit balance. So the data is still there, but now you have got the attributes attached to the data, that the data is a credit, this balance is a credit, or this balance is a debit, or this balance is 0 also. So an owner, some object representing, for example, is another attribute that you can attach with the data. Means that the balance belongs to one particular account, or balance belongs to one particular person. So now you are attaching more attributes, adding more attributes to that particular object. So they are all interrelated, and whenever you are going to process an object, whenever you are going to deal with an object, then you know that the data has got some states, the data has got some characteristics, that it has got certain methods attached to it, and that methods means that certain functions that can be performed on that particular data, and then it has got certain other relationship with reference to the other objects also, or maybe the objects that are the characteristics becomes the characteristics of one particular object. We can see the example of a rabbit object. What is this rabbit object? Rabbit, we can see that any rabbit that you use it in different games, that you can create it as an object that can represent an object rabbit. Now the data that you could be associating with the rabbit is the how hungry it is. It's hungry for the last 2 hours, 4 hours, and you can attach how frightened it is, whether it is feeling comfortable or not, or whether it is frightened. This is the attribute that you can assign, and where it is, what is the location and what is the position of the that particular object. Now we can attach certain methods also with this particular object rabbit, and these methods could be method of eating, method of hide, method of run, method of dig. So this object can perform certain operation. Rabbit could be eating, rabbit could be hiding somewhere, rabbit is running, in a lawn or anywhere, or rabbit is digging a lawn, or rabbit is digging the earth. Okay, so these are the methods that are related with our object rabbit. So you can see that the data has got certain attributes, that it is hungry, frightened, or its location, and then it has got certain methods also. So that becomes the complete object which represents a rabbit. So that is the way we work in the C++ in the object-oriented methods. I will give you more details also. Then there is a terminology which is called as a class. So what is the relationship between the object and a class? We can say that the classes describes the object. Classes describes the object. So how the classes describes the object? Every object belongs to a class, or is an instance of a class. Is an instance of a class. What does it mean? You will understand once I explain certain more concepts related to that. So an object may have certain fields, or an object may have certain variables. Hungry is a variable, its location is a variable. So basically the object's attributes could be the fields or could be the variable. So the methods, basically the class describes those fields. Those fields mean to manipulate those fields with the help of certain functions, and these functions are called methods. So an object may have number of methods, may have one method. In our example, eating was one method, and hiding was another method, and running was the third method. So we can say that the class comprises those methods, means how to manipulate that particular data, how to manipulate that the attributes of the data defined into that particular object. So we can see that a class could be a templates of cookies cutter. Have you seen a cookies cutter? In our language, in Urdu, we may call it as sancha, jisko kehte hain. Sancha means in the bakery where the baker use to produce different cookies, biscuits वगैरह, उसकी cutting के लिए एक सांचा इस्तेमाल किया जाता है. So that is called basically a template. So they prepare a paste and put it, continuous paste means put it onto the table, then they put that particular the template, वो जो सांचा है उसको प्लेस करते हैं, and cut each and every biscuit. So it may have got the templates of 24 biscuits, shape of 24 biscuits, which are simultaneously placed onto that material, and these 24 biscuits get their shape according to the shape is provided in the template. So a class is like a template, and we use this template to create the object. So we can call this template as a class constructor. We use a class constructor to make the object. It is just like the template that I have explained it to you. So you can use a class constructor, and with the help of class constructor you can create the number of objects. So classes are like abstract data types. This is another concept which is available in the object-oriented programming. An abstract data type bundles together, means some data representing an object or something, means the attributes of that particular data. The operations that can be performed on the data can also be associated with that, as we have just talked about it. So the operations defined by an abstract data type are the only operations that are permitted to the data. Okay, for example, a checking account with operations deposit, withdraw, and get balance. So checking account is basically a class that we contain any object. So checking account means using this class you can create as many clients of the bank as you like. So whenever a new client joins to one particular bank, what you will do, you will use the class checking account, and using this checking account you can create a client, and that client is an object, and that object, what the client can do, the client can deposit the money, the client can withdraw the money, and client can ask you to provide him the balance, what is the account balance of that particular client. So this is basically a class, and you can use the class constructor every time a new client joins to the bank, and all the operations that can be performed to that particular client is limited, and that is already defined in the form of templates. So classes enforce this binding together. So if all the data and values are private to a class, and can also enforce the rules because they are defined operations, since they are the part of that particular class, and now you can enforce the rules and regulation onto the data, because there are only certain functions which are available, only certain methods which are available. So these methods could be the operations, certain operations which are available. So it's mean that you can enforce these methods, and no additional method can be performed. For example, if you may like to show that this is the client that contains the highest balance in the account, that is not permitted. So that is a private. Means that all the data is private, only visible to that class, and if this data is only visible to that class, then the class has defined that only 3 operations can be performed, and these 3 operations are the deposit, withdrawal, and balance. Okay, so no exhibition to any particular account, or no sharing of information to any other account, because this is a private data that you have defined as a part of that particular class. Example of classes, just could like to show you, you can define a class employee, in which you can define name that you can declare as a private, and data type is string. You can also define the data type, just like the structure. You can define C++ your own data type, and one of the data type is a string. So this could be something new, so just that's why I've explained it. Then you have the name, and then you can define another variable, which is the salary. Then you can also declare it as a private. Then the default constructor that is called, or you can define it by yourself, that employee, and that means employee data type has string, and that is string n and double s. So these are the parameter list that are passed on to this constructor. Then you can say that the name is equal to n and salary is equal to s. So when you call this particular constructor, then this object will be created. A new client has joined the bank, then the class or new employee has joined the bank, and then this class employee will be used as a template, and then you can just register the name of that employee, and then you can define the salary of that employee, and this new object employee is created. Then the methods, we can define a method is a pay. Whenever an employee joins to one particular organization, then obviously you need to provide the pay to that particular employee. So for that purpose, you can define the method, and that method is a pay that returns nothing, but what it does, it provides basically system.output.print pay of the order of this, plus you can just concatenate it with the name, and then you can just concatenate it with the $sign, and then with the concatenate the salary. So this is another feature of printing using this print line function, and maybe some other time I'll be talking about this concatenation plus signs. That is a feature available, but here you can simply say that it will print the salary of that particular employee. Public string get name, return type. So this was the method that was available in the employees. Then this was only the private method available. This particular method which is available has been declared as a public, so that the public means at anyone can find out and can request you that the list of the employees, and you can find out the name of every employee, and if you want you can just make it as a public function. So this is called a getter. Getter means get, to get some information. So all the methods which get certain information is called a getter. Similarly, there is a term that cannot get or set. This is double salary, can get but not change. Okay, so these are the characteristics that we have defined with the help of the comment, but I will come back to this getter and setter later on with some other examples. The terminology that is commonly used now is the instance. For example, instance is equal to the object. Object is an instance of a class. Then we can use a field. Field is a variable, and that is an instance of a variable. Instance means an occurrence of that particular variable. Why we call it as an instance? Because that instance is with an instance to an object. One employee has joined. One employee has joined is an instance, and the name of that employee has been registered. The variables that are associated with that instance are defined. So then there are functions which we call it as methods. So sending a message to an object is just like calling to that function. So when you are required to call the function, basically we send a message, means we call that function. So these are the terminology which are called as an approximate terminologies. Classes form and hierarchy. Hierarchy कहते हैं order from top to bottom, from top to down. It's a tree-like hierarchy. You can have one root, and then you can have the lower level, then you can have another level. So this is called basically the hierarchy. And classes basically provide you a hierarchical structure. So classes are arranged in a tree-like structure called hierarchy, and the classes, each class has got a root, which is the name of that particular object. Then every class except object has a superclass. When we have a class, we may have a superclass also, and a class may have a several ancestor up to that object. So when you are going to create an object, that object may be inherited from one class and from the parent class, from the super parent class, or from the superclasses. Means the object can be created with different classes, the instance of different classes, that I will explain you with the help of example later on. So class may have a several ancestor up to that particular object, but once the object is created, means you have defined something, and that has all the features which are inherited from where this object has been created. So you can define a class, you can specify its superclass also. If you don't specify a superclass, then the object is assumed. Okay? Object is assumed. Every class may have one or more superclasses. Means that the object will assume the inheritance from its class, or from where it has been defined, or it has come to the existence. That it could only be explained with the help of this example. For example, you have got a class container. Then you can have a subclass panel, scroll panel, and window. Okay? So you can say that this container is the superclass of window. Scroll panel is a subclass of container, and the container is the superclass of this scroll panel. Then there are two subclasses, dialog and frame. Then there is a subclass of which is called field dialog. So field dialog, if you want to create an object, has a class dialog, then it has a superclass window, then it has a superclass container. So a field dialog is a dialog, field dialog is a dialog, is a window, or is a container. Okay, so it will be an object, and that object inherits from that object inherits from dialog, then window, and then container, from left to right. Okay. In C++, there may be more than one root, but in Java there is always one root. So it's mean that C provides you a feature where you can inherit with multiple classes. So it's not just one root from where you can just inherit. Okay, in this previous example, you can create, if it is Java, then you can just have, it will inherit from dialog, it will inherit from window, then it will inherit from container. But you, in C language, you can create a file dialog that might have the dialog and might have the features of the panel also, might have the feature of the frame also. So the class may be, the object may be created by different classes. Inheritance may be obtained from different classes, and object can be created. That is the feature of the C language. So the C++ object may have more than one parent and immediate superclasses. But in Java, as I said, it is not there. So object inherits from superclasses. That is a very, very important feature that I could like to go through it. A class describes fields and method. An object of that class have those fields and methods, but an object also inherits. What does it mean? It means that it can inherit a field that described in the classes superclass. आसान अल्फाज में आपको बताऊं, you may have some inheritance from your father, but you may have some characteristics, some inherited feature directly from your grandfather that was not inherited to your father. कोई आपकी शख्सियत में ऐसी चीज़ भी आ सकती है जो कि आपके ग्रैंडफादर की शख्सियत का पार्ट थी, but that was not the part of your father, and you might inherit directly from your grandfather or from your forefathers. So that is mean that a field described in the class is superclass. So the method described in the class is also defined in the superclass. So a class is not a complete description of an object. आप ये नहीं कह सकते कि जो class आपने define की है, that is the complete description of that particular object. Why? Because it might have inherited something which is not that in this class, but that has been inherited from its superclass or from some other class also. So this inheritance, suppose a person we defined as a class person that has a name, that has an age, and then you can define a method which is a birthday. So every time the person has his birthday, we add 1. So as long as if this person is an employee, so it extends person, means whatever the characteristics a person has, that characteristics are there with that particular employee, and then the additional characteristics, and that is the salary that the employee can get, where the person does not get a salary, whereas the employee gets a salary. And then employee has got an additional method which is called a pay. So let us see, the every employee has since it is inherited from the person, so the every employee has got name, the age, and has the facility of calculating the birthday. But the method as well as salary and field and the pay are also available to that particular employee. So person does not have a salary, person does not have a method pay, but employee has a salary, employee has a pay, and employee has got all the features that has inherited from the class person. क्योंकि now whenever you will create an employee, जब एक object बनेगा employee का, it will inherit all the features which are defined as a person, and it will already have some additional features that you are going to define in the class employee. So that is the mean of the inheritance. Object must be created. What does it mean? Just like in the C language when we say integer x, what it does, it declares that n a data type which is an integer, and it allocates a space to hold the value of n. And we know that if we say int n is equal to 5, it means that the system declares that n is a variable which has a data type equal to integer, and then the space is allocated and data is initialized. So a primitive of this is all what it is required. But when we say employee secretary, what it does, it describes that the secretary is an employee. It allocates space to hold a reference to that particular employee. For an object, this is not all it is needed. Why? When we say that secretary is a new employee, so it is just like integer n is equal to 5, means that the space has been allocated, the object employee has been created. If you don't say, you just define an secretary as employee, you can say that employee secretary. When you say employee secretary, then a pointer is created. That pointer contains null because no space has been allocated. So this is just like a pointer to an employee. Secretary is a pointer to an employee without any space allocated into the memory. But when we say secretary is a new employee, it means that within the memory of the computer a space has been allocated for which is given a name secretary, which has a pointer to an employee, means all the characteristics and feature and the size given in the employee. So in that case it contains the pointer that is pointing out to something, and that something is an object. So the object is created here, or the object is created with the help of a constructor also. So how to declare and create object? When we say employee secretary, it declares a secretary. We've just announced it, just int x, no space is allocated unless until you put some data into it. Then you say that secretary is equal to new employee, it allocates the space. When you say that employee secretary is equal to new employee, it does both. So instead of doing it in two statements, you can do it in one statement. But the secretary is still blank, null. Now we need to put the data, we need to put the name of the secretary, we need to put the method attached to it, we need to call the birthday of that particular secretary also. And that can only be done when you use secretary.name is equal to Adil, or the secretary.birthday sends a message, means you call this function to set up the birthday of that particular employee. So we can say class person age is equal to age plus 1. So basically you have defined a person and you have already called it, you have already defined the age of that particular person, and you may call a function which say that is Ahmed.age is less than 60, then you can call Ahmed.birthday. What does it mean? This Ahmed is an employee, and if it is he is less than 60 years, he can still be the employed, or if it is he is 60 years of age, then he will be no longer employed, will become the superannuated. So we can say that as long as Ahmed is less than 60 degree, you can just call its birthday, and you can keep on increasing 1 year on his birthday to maintain the age of that particular employee. So if you don't have an object, you cannot use its field. So it's mean that you can only do that if you have created the object Ahmed. Without creating the object Ahmed, you cannot use that. There is a concept of this object which is called, for example, you can say class person. Now you have not defined yet any object, so you can use this dot age is equal to this dot age plus 1. So this is like an extra parameter to the method, and we really don't use it. We use it with its proper utilization and with the help of a constructor. So that should be the last topic that I will be discussing with that. So before that, the concept a variable can hold subclass object. Now I've already given you the concept of class, subclass, and superclass. Superclass is basically, it could be your grandparent class, parent is the class and you are the subclass of your parent. So suppose B is a subclass of A, means B is a child of A. So an object, A object, can be assigned an A variable because that is the part of the same level. B object can be assigned a B variable. Then B object can be assigned to A variable. Why? That B is supposed to be the subclass of A. So B can be assigned to a variable A, but A object cannot be assigned to variable B, because you don't know that B might have inherited something that might have inherited to a superclass. So you cannot equate that one. You cannot equate two objects together. You cannot equate two variables together, because that means that it might not have the same characteristics and same feature. So you can use the casting for that, and that casting can only be done. For example, you can see that a B variable you have defined and you have defined an A variable. You may have defined an object A, you may have defined an object B. So B variable is equal to B A object. This is just like the typecasting that we have been doing that. Okay, so here we have assigned the data, but before assigning the data, we have typecasted A object to an object B, and then we have assigned it to B. Just like if we typecast float to an integer. So first we will typecast float to an integer, and then we assign it to the integer value. Similarly, we will typecast A object to typecast B object, and then we can assign it to a B variable. Okay. Assignment of subclasses. So this could be an example. Suppose we have defined a class dog, and then we can define a class that is a subclass. Poodle is one of the dog that is called poodle, that extends to dog. Should have all the characteristics which are the characteristics of the dog, but might have some additional characteristics. So then you define a variable dog, my dog. Then you can define dog rover is equal to new dog. So you have created an object dog. Then you have defined poodle as an object. Poodle, this is a variable. So you can say poodle, your poodle. And then we can say that poodle Fifi is equal to new poodle. Means you have defined an object poodle. Now, what we can do with it? If we say my dog is equal to rover, yes, because rover is the object that is created with the help of the dog. So you can do that. So your poodle is equal to Fifi, means this is also the part of the same object. My dog is equal to Fifi, that is also okay, because my dog is a dog and this Fifi is a poodle, which is the basically subclass of that dog. So subclass you can just assign to that. That means that it should have the that particular feature that is inherited from the parent class. But when we say your poodle is equal to rover, that is not possible, because you don't know that a poodle should have all the features which are dog. That is sure, that is quite sure that that feature is that, but it might have some additional features which are not there in the dog. So it is a special characteristics in the poodle that might not be there. Therefore, you cannot assign this subclass object or variable to that particular object. That becomes illegal. So before doing that, you need to do this typecasting first. So you can just do it a poodle, and then you can assign it to this one. Methods that can be overridden. Let me quickly give you another example, that is class bird, and we can extend as a subclass animal. Then we can say that the bird can fly, and we can define a string destination where the bird fly, and then location is equal to destination. Then we can define a penguin that extends from the bird, and then we can define also a fly string, whatever. So basically this is a method that has got a name fly, and here we have defined a method that has given the same name. It is just like you have defined a global variable and then you have defined a local variable. Whenever you will call this penguin, the penguin will call this fly, because the penguin might not be able to fly. So this fly function might not force the penguin to fly. So you can define something according to the characteristics of the penguin here. So bird can fly dot except penguins, because you have overwritten this one. You have this fly is no more visible to this one, because the visibility of the fly is this particular function that you have defined within the subclass. So I'm just skipping this topic. You can just read it out. So already there. So constructors. So this topic that I just quickly like to discuss before concluding this lecture. Constructor, basically it automatically called when an object is created. So every class has a constructor. That is a template through which you can create an object. So you can use a keyword new. Whenever you use a keyword new, you can call the constructor. Whenever you say secretary is equal to new employee, what does it mean? It will call the default constructor, and that default constructor will create an employee. Okay, so you can write your own constructor, just like you can this override a function. You can write your own constructor, or you can use the default constructor which are provided by the C language. So the syntax of writing the constructor is almost like that for writing the methods. So you can define a very specialized constructor, or you may like use the default constructor. So I'm just quickly going through it, and you can read out the details by yourself. Syntax for the constructor: employee, string, the name. These are the argument that you are going to pass to the constructor. So whenever you will call an employee, you will pass on the name of the employee, and you will pass on the salary of the employee. The constructor will do name is equal to assign the name, and the salary is equal to assign the salary. Okay, that is the syntax, just like the syntax of other methods that we could define. So the employee is a person, and a person is an object. Then when you say a new employee, what does it mean? The employee constructor calls the person constructor, because employee is a person. The person constructor calls the object constructor, because you need to create a person, and then you will create an object employee. The object constructor creates a new object, and that object is basically a person. The person constructor adds its own stuff to the object, so that it could become the whatever you have defined, the characteristics of a person will be assigned it first, and then the employee constructor adds its own stuff to the person. आसान अल्फाज में क्या है कि when you create an employee also has used the subclass, a class which is called a person class. So when the constructor is called, first of all you need to have a person, and an employee should have all the characteristics. That characteristics are related to a person, means it has got its name, it has got its age, or whatever characteristics that you have associated with the class person. Once this subclass is created, the object is created, then this object is not going to stay as a person. This object is going to stay as an employee. So then the additional characteristics will be added on, and this additional characteristics could be added by calling the constructor of default constructor of an employee. So सबसे पहले क्या है, the default constructor of employee is called. This default constructor calls the default constructor of a person. When the person is created, then additional characteristics are added, and that's the way an employee constructor is created. So the classes can have a fields, and they can have a methods, and I'm again skipping it out. You can just read it out, because you will study these concepts in very much detail again when you will study the object-oriented course. So just like to give you the example here: class person, string name, age, and static integer population. Every time you do person is born, you add 1 to the population. Then you use this person, the different methods. For example, this constructor you can call constructor string name that you need to provide. So you can say this dot name is equal to name, then this dot age is equal to 0 because I just born, and then you can add 1 to the population. Recommendations: you can restrict access. Always strive for a narrow instance, okay, so that you may not make any mistake. For example, what is the principle of information hiding? The caller should know as little as possible about how a method describes its job. This is not the job of the, this is not the but I can say that this is not the right of any client to know how the bank is maintaining its account, how this account is being maintained, how many ledgers they have, how many entries they are making. It's a single entry system, it's a double entry system. So this method should be hidden from the object. This method should be hidden from any user. The user should simply say that open an account. The user should simply say that provide the balance of that particular client. Or the client just say that what is the account balance of mine in that particular account. So how it is done, that should not be the requirement, and that should not be the right of that particular object or that particular user. So the method should know little or nothing about where and why it is being called. So we can make use of a keyword which is called private to hide the data. Similarly, you can have a private method that are not available to any particular users. Only that particular class, that particular object, whenever it is created, whenever it is required, it should be able to use it. So unless until you don't have the access to that complete piece of software, you should not be able to see how it is working over there. So as I said, I will just be finishing with this some setters and getters. What does it mean? Setter is to set something and getter is to provide the information. Set means to set the piece of information and get is to provide the piece of information. For example, you have defined an employee which has extended class person. So you can have private salary, it's then private boolean, it's a male, that is the employee is a male or a female, and then public void set salary, what is its salary, then public double get salary, and public boolean is male. If it's male or female, you can set it up there. So basically we can say that the object can maintain a control, and then setters and getters have the conventional names. So set data name, get data name, is data name should be the name of the functions, and through which you can set the value and you can get the value of any particular employee or any particular information. So with the help of this methods, set name, get salary is a getter, the set salary is a setter, and you can have as many setters and getters as you are required. So finally, C++ provides 4 levels of access. You can declare any data as a public or any function as a public. You can, if it is declared as a public, so it is just like a public park, and then anyone can use it, anyone can go into that public park. It is available to all the public. Protected. Protected means that available within the package, available within the subclasses. For example, this time the park is your lawn within your premises of your house. So this is not a public park, this is protected. This is protected from the public, but the access has only been provided to your family, to your children, to your grandchildren. So all the subclasses which are your children, which are your grandchildren, they can have an access because they have the inheritance and they have the inherited right to use the property of that particular family. So the protected means that it has got only protected access among the different users, but that user should first qualify that they should have the inheritance and they should have the belong to the subclasses. Then comes private. Private means a loan that is available only to, for example, an office loan, the loan of any particular office. So basically the employees, or maybe the bathroom of the chief executive, that could be a private. So the all employees are, although they are inherited to that particular organization, but they are not allowed to use that, because that is only a private area to that particular chief executive. So that is the concept that is provided in the object oriented, that you can declare object and method as a public, as a private, or as a protected. There is another concept which is called a default, available within the package, that has certain rules and regulation that you can define it and put it up as a default. So dear students, with this we have completed the lesson of the introduction of the object-oriented programming. Also, we have completed this course and we have finished all the 32 lessons today. Now students, I have been repeatedly requesting you and advising you to kindly spend quite a good time in the within the environment that we have created, and have a good time doing the practice, hands-on exercises, assignments, and all the examples that are provided in your textbook, in your reference book, and some other books. And I have given you the demonstration of the number of hands-on demonstration and number of examples I have given you during the lesson. So this is a practical course. I assure you, whatever topic I have covered are more than sufficient. If you have augmented your knowledge with the hands-on skills and hands-on practice, and you have spent sufficient time doing hands-on exercises, that I assure you, whatever I have taught you in the 32 lectures and 32 lessons is more than sufficient to have the basic skills of the programming. If you can do programming in C, then you can do programming in C++ by just running some additional concepts of object-oriented. But you can still do the programming in Fortran language, you can do the programming in any procedural language and structured language, because we have had a very good lessons and examples and explanations during this particular course. So I hope that you have enjoyed this course studying with me. I'll still be available through your portal, and will be answering to your queries through my TA, through my colleagues, and through the management that will deliver this particular course to you. Okay, so we'll see again, and we'll meet again maybe in another course that I might be teaching to you in future. Okay, till then, Khuda Hafiz, Allah Nigeban.